welcome to another episode of Serious Questions, Serious Answers, where we match up your questions to an expert on your topic. I'm your host, Brandon, and tonight, joining me again from Los Angeles is Brian Godawa, a Christian author and a Hollywood screenwriter and movie director. Besides working in Hollywood, Mr. Godawa has written a wide array of articles, everything from movie reviews to work published in the Christian Research Journal. And Brian's novel, Noah Primeval, which recently released, has been garnishing rave reviews. Brian, thanks again for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Brandon.
All right. Well, our question for tonight is something that would go right along the lines of his new novel on Noah. The question is, in Genesis 6, did God wipe out a race of giants with the flood? Brian, I know you've been doing a lot of research. You did a lot of research for your novel, Noah Primeval. And I went through your website, and you have a lot of articles that you've written and articles that you refer other people, scholarly articles that you refer other people to on the subject. And I know you'd be a great person to answer this question. So I'm curious what you have to say.
All right. Well, first of all, yes, God did wipe out a race of giants with the flood, which really sounds weird. As a matter of fact, for me, Genesis 6, 1 through 4, has always been the weirdest passage in the Bible to me. And let me just read it briefly so you can see what I'm talking about. It says, "When man began to multiply on the face of the land, and daughters were born to them, the sons of God saw that the daughters of man were attractive, and they took as their wives any they chose. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, when the sons of God came into the daughters of men," that's sexual relations, "and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown." Well, I've always thought, what is that about? Is that just some weird, obscure thing that God throws into the Bible to freak us out? I mean, what is the Nephilim? And we find that the Nephilim, the word Nephilim, is actually a transliteration of the Hebrew word. They didn't translate it because they're not always sure what it exactly means, but I will show you that it does mean giants. And the other thing is these sons of God, which traditionally is understood as being heavenly beings from God's throne. So they're basically angels come to earth. Well, there's been a long history of interpretations in church history. Within the Orthodox believers camp, within Orthodox Christianity, there have been differing interpretations because it's not always entirely clear. But Nephilim, as I said, is one of those words that is not translated, it's transliterated, which means they're afraid to give it an exact definition. And sometimes the reason is because they're not sure. Sometimes it's because the translators have preconceived notions and they're afraid to translate it a certain way because it will make the Bible, they think it will make the Bible look bad. And they're worried that if they translate it as giants, it'll look like it's mythology. I don't think that that's the case, and I think they shouldn't be afraid to do so. But the people who don't think the Nephilim are giants will say, well, it calls them mighty warriors, men of renown. So it really just means that they're not giants, but they're mighty warriors. Well, they were mighty warriors and men of renown, but the thing is, if you look elsewhere in the Bible, where the term Nephilim is used, it clears up the question, and it makes it very clear that Nephilim are in fact giants. Let's take a quick look at what the other place in the Bible where it says that. And that is the book of Numbers, chapter 13, verses 32 through 33. And God said, "Go conquer all the Canaanites and take over the land." But they have to send spies in to see what it's like. Come back and give us a report. So the spies come back, and this is what they say. "The land through which we have gone to spy it out is a land that devours its inhabitants. And all the people that we saw in it are of great height. And there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, who come from the Nephilim. And we seemed to ourselves like grasshoppers, so we seemed to them." So here we see very clearly that the Anakim, or the sons of Anak, are giants, and they are descendants of the Nephilim. Elsewhere in the Bible, we see in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 2, we see more names of these giants. In other words, at different places or locations in the Promised Land, they had giants, but they called them by different names because maybe they had different languages. I don't know. And in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 2, we read giants are called the Anakim somewhere, in some places. In some places they're called the Emim. In other places they're called Rephaim. Zamzumim in another location, which is weird, right? The Avim in another location, and the Caphtorim. So multiple locations, they're called by these different terms, and they're all basically giants. Roughly, if you look through the Old Testament in detail, you'll see that there's over a dozen people groups or clans in the Old Testament that are described as having giants. These are people groups or clans. There are also about a dozen cities or areas by name that are described as having giants. And there are about a dozen specific giants who are named in the Promised Land. Goliath is one of the most famous, but he's not the only one. There's about a dozen of them that are actually named. This giant had this name, and he was killed by David and his mighty men. So it's surprising how often giants are referred to in reference to the Promised Land and God wanting to wipe them out. In fact, in the book of Joshua, chapter 11, we see Joshua saying that Joshua utterly destroyed all the Anakim, the giants, from their cities. It's almost like he's deliberately hunting down the giants. This is really weird, right? So why? Why all these giants? Why were they so prevalent in the Promised Land? Well, we get a clue from the New Testament, and this is where Christians have to say, well, it also references this in the New Testament. In the books of 2 Peter and Jude, we learn about these sons of God or angels that came to earth and cohabited or had sexual relations with women. And the forbidden relationship between angels and humans is what it's talking about in 2 Peter and Jude. And that union of angels and humans, the hybrid, what it resulted in was these Nephilim in Genesis 6. In my book, Noah Primeval, it's the first of a series called The Chronicles of the Nephilim. And it's a novel. And I wanted to try to explain the origins and what it all means. What is it all about? So I just gave a fictional storyline that tried to remain true to the spirit of the text, but also bring in some of this new research that I found about giants and sons of God, and try to explain the biblical theology behind the Nephilim and the giants. At the back of the book, I have appendices where I deal more with the biblical research, but you can also read the novel and just have a fun, rip-roaring adventure time. Like it reads kind of like Lord of the Rings, and but it will explain that there's more to it than just this weird thing. But there's actually a storyline going on here that actually reveals something about God's kingdom.
Very interesting. I'm curious. Have you read anything on scholarly debate on the size of the giants? I know, if I remember right, the Israelites were not very tall, and I know when they refer to themselves as grasshoppers, they're not literally saying that they were, 90-foot tall giants, but that was more of just imagery that they always use, the hyperbolic language. But do you have any ideas that they have on the actual size?
Well, we know Goliath was like a little over 9 feet, right? So we know that that's roughly up here. But I do agree with you, that the Israelites were probably a little bit smaller, thus making them appear bigger. So whether or not they're 25 foot or 30 foot, I doubt that. I seriously doubt that that's even feasible. But we could go upwards of 9 to 12 to 13 feet. The Bible says King Og had a bed, or it could have been a coffin, but the term is basically he had a bed that was 13 feet tall. Now, or 13 feet long, And King Og was part of the Rephaim, who are known to be giants. So I think that somewhere in that area range, and yes, you're right, there is hyperbole, but the hyperbole is rooted in reality. If you're like 4 to 5 foot tall and someone's 9 to 13 foot tall, they're still giants, and there's still something weird going on there. That's my point. So yeah.
Right. Well, that is fascinating. I definitely want to direct any of the interested youth to your book. I love good fiction, and it's fun to read about the biblical character in a whole new light. So I'm looking forward to picking that up myself.
Can I throw one more thing?
Yeah.
Can I throw one more thing? I just
Absolutely.
thought, if you want, to kind of give a hint of where it's all going. there's the first messianic prophecy in the Bible, I think, is in Genesis, where God is cursing the serpent, and he's also cursing the man and the woman. But he basically says to the serpent that you on your belly you will go. But then he says this. He says, "And there I will put enmity between your seed and the seed of the woman." And I think ultimately this refers to the seed of the woman is ultimately going to be a human line that leads to Messiah, because the Old Testament is very concerned about showing the bloodline being pure, leading to Messiah. That would be, from a certain bloodline, right? And I think that there may be some connection here between the seed of the serpent, meaning the serpent was one of these sons of God, basically the adversary, the Satan. In the Old Testament, the term "the Satan" means the adversary, and not necessarily a specific name, but he's the adversary. But anyway, he was one of these sons of God. And my point here is that I think that maybe these sons of God, cohabiting with women and violating the separateness of creation that God separates in creation. He separates male from female, heaven from earth, right? All these separation things. There's a sense of holiness. Well, I think these angels were violating that separation and trying to bring things together. And the one of those separations was the heavenly and the earthly. And that maybe these giants are somehow connected to this seed of the serpent, of which God is trying to wipe out, and maybe that's what it's leading to in the Promised Land. Not entirely sure, but there's something to it.
Yeah, that is very interesting. All right. Well, thanks again, Brian, for another exciting interview, and thank you again, youth. It's been another fun episode, and if you want to find out more about Brian Godawa and his work, you can go to briangodawa.com and check out anything he has there. He has Noah Primeval available. So thanks again, Brian. And youth, remember, if you have a serious question and want a serious answer, write it down and put it in the box. See ya.